come to me, feel alright. Just dance with me all through the night. Turn it out, close to you. I feel good, 'cause I just know feeling of you. Give it to me, baby. Feel alright. I feel good. Just want you step with me, dance with me, here with me, feel alright. I feel good on you, alright. Make a groove all night.
Hey there folks, and welcome back to another Let's Talk About video where I discuss and sort of review games I'm playing but not really making content for. In today's video, we're going to discuss Lies of P, developed by NeoWiz and Round 8 Studio. I have not played any of their previous works, so I'm going in without much history on this one. Now, I know there has been a lot of buzz about Lies of P, and everyone clamored about this game when the demo came out, saying it's the Bloodborne spiritual successor since Bloodborne 2 will never exist. And I know that got a lot of attention drawn towards the game because that sort of tagline is kind of what got me interested too. Now, I had not played the demo or really seen any gameplay of the game before I dropped in, because I like to go into Souls games like as blind as I can. But I also want to clear some of the air before we dive into this, like meat and potatoes of Lies of P, before we actually start the review. And what I want to say is that this game is not Bloodborne, and it doesn't really resemble Bloodborne at all. It doesn't play like Bloodborne. If anything, it plays like a really slow Sekiro. But honestly, just don't go into this thinking you're getting Bloodborne 2. That kind of hype before the game launched made me go in with a vastly different idea of what I was going to be playing, and it kind of hurt my perception of the game in the first few hours. So go into Lies of P with a clean slate. It's its own game. It's still very much a Souls-like, of course it is, with all the same good and bad tropes these games kind of offer, but Lies of P is definitely the most polished Souls-like game that I've played, and I've played quite a few. It's just got a really slow start, and the game gets much better as you go further in, so don't let the initial impressions or mine sway you too much. But with that little preamble out of the way, I want to break down the talking points of this video into a few categories, first being the performance and the overall look and art direction of the game. Then I want to get into gameplay, which is the big one in the majority of this video, and then we're going to finish off with just a little bit of like world building section. So let's discuss the performance and all things related to that. Surprisingly, Lies of P runs perfectly, something that is a rarity these days, especially on PC. Not once did I experience frame drops, stutters, crashes, or any bugs even. And when I say flawless, I really mean it is flawless. And I'm very much a stickler for things like frame stutters and low frame rate and little hiccups here and there. Looking at you, Wild Hearts. I played Lies of P on two different rigs, my main desktop, which is sporting an i9 1100K, and a 3070, which is pretty meaty of course, and I expected it to run great. But I also played the second half of the game on my laptop, which is just an i5 2.6 GHz and a mobile 2060 card. Something that's going to be showing its age pretty soon here, as the 2060 series of cards for laptops not really holding up the games these days. But either way, never had issues with Lies of P, and for that, I give it a solid gold star. Performance is definitely the most important aspect of gaming for me, because regardless of how good the gameplay is, if it's stuttering, crashing, and has variable frame rate, it's a garbage game. Continuing on with the presentation of Lies of P, it's also one of the nicest looking Souls-likes, because Souls-like games are never really known for their graphic fidelity. And while graphically it's not anything mind-blowing, overall though, the shading, the art direction, and the lighting does pull a lot of the weight in drawing you into the world. I was getting very similar vibes to this as I did with Steel Rising, because they share very similar aspects as far as like the art direction goes. But Lies of P looks and feels a lot more natural with their textures and woods and metals, and it really helps you just get immersed a little bit more compared to like Steel Rising, who had very vibrant colors and filigree and abstract designs. Of course, this is just personal preference, but I do like the presentation of Lies of P overall. And then another part about the presentation that I really love is that the game is voice acted, which is always appreciated. I really wish we didn't have another silent protagonist though, as there's very little actual choices to make in the game, so I feel like they could have given Pinocchio a voice, but minor complaint there. Overall though, Lies of P is very easy on the eyes, and your ears too, because it does have some pretty nice soundtracks. Now moving on, I want to discuss gameplay, and there's a lot to cover here, and we're definitely taking the good and the bad. So please take what I say with a grain of salt, because it's going to be relatively negative by the sounds of it, but trust me, I still like the game, I loved it, I finished it, just getting that out of the way. So I want to address the core movement and actions in Lies of P. And as I mentioned, this is not Bloodborne. Lies of P is slow, very slow, both in animations, but as well as recovery from hits and swings and such. And there is no animation canceling. You need to be very deliberate with every action you take, because you will get pummeled for committing to one more attack than you really need to. It's definitely something that you need to get into the groove of as you play, because if you go into Lies of P head first thinking that you're playing in a faster paced Bloodborne-esque type game, then you're going to run out of all your stamina by sprinting and attacking, and you're going to be dead, because this is not a hyper offensive Souls-like, it is entirely the opposite, which leads me into my next point, the defense. So defense in Lies of P is a little odd. Nothing too crazy, you can block, but there is no shields, so blocking eats up HP and stamina, which is determined by our weapon. So one-handed weapons take more damage on block, two-handed weapons take less. And when you block, some of the damage you take will be recoverable through a rally system, very much like Bloodborne, which is where I think people actually make that connection. But it's only available on block, so getting hit from rolling or just being in a neutral state does not grant you recoverable health. You can parry, but it's more of a perfect block, which makes you take no penalty for the block. And parrying can also break some enemy weapons if you parry enough times, but honestly, the only time I ever found this useful was against some of the human hunters, because breaking weapons does not stop anyone's attacks or movesets, it just makes them deal a little less damage. And you also can't break any of the boss weapons as far as I could tell. They do kind of flash when you parry, like they're taking durability, but I never got anything to break, but also I'm not parrying every single attack in the game. I finished the game and never broke a single boss weapon, but I did break some of the hunter weapons. But overall though, parrying is super important, just like in Sekiro, because you just can't keep blocking everything. Eventually you'll just die due to HP loss and stamina loss, so you can't block anymore. So it's important to weave your blocks, your parries, and dodging. But ultimately I found that parrying was just kind of unreliable and was rarely worth the effort. Sure, when you can do it, it's always worth doing, and there are some attacks that are very easy to parry, but the parry timing is extremely tight in this game, and if you fail to parry, you take huge chunks of damage because everything in this game hits you very hard. I found it easier to either just dodge everything and then parry some of the frenzy attacks that you're required to parry, or build the opposite side and never dodge, and just focus on stamina and blocking and try to heal through that, but that kind of build only seems to work in like the late game. Anyway, it's just a little jarring at times and it requires a lot of practice to find your rhythm, and I can see it as a turnoff for players, myself included, because of all three of your options, your block, dodge, and parry, all seem to be just not quite good enough on their own. There will be attacks that you just can't dodge all the hits of because, enemies just swing faster than you can dodge. And there are attacks you just can't block all the hits of because enemies just attack 6-7 times in a combo. And there are things that you must parry, and failure means, well, you're dead. So it's a dance, and one that's very, very hard to learn. Now, part of this problem I had in Lies of P was also the same problem I have in most of the Souls-likes that are coming out these days. Now, ever since Sekiro came out, and then again exacerbated in Elden Ring, Souls-like games love to have a similar combat approach with their enemies, where they hold their attacks up or slowly raise their arms and take like 5 seconds to prepare their attack, and hold it, and then instantly snap down the attack on you. And it's really annoying to me. Maybe it's a me issue, but I absolutely hate this trope of Souls-like games doing this, and it's one of the reasons why I don't really jive with Elden Ring as much as I wanted to, and same here. It looks just so unnatural, and the timing is so obscure because you're not looking to time the attacks, like a full swing motion, but you're just trying to time the draw animation to know when the draw is done because the attack's going to snap down instantly. And it just always throws me off. And I get that it looks a bit more normal for robotic enemies to do things like that, and I mean, so like in here and in Steel Rising, it kind of makes a little bit more sense thematically, but every single enemy in the game does this, and it's one of the reasons why I found the combat so difficult, and even more so into the day-to-day enemies rather than just the bosses. And then the second part of the combat, which I really didn't appreciate, is that enemies have absurdly high poise and barely get staggered, and paired with some fast recoveries mean you don't really have time to do more than like one swing, maybe two if you have a fast one-handed weapon, before you need to duck back out and reset the combat flow. You can be swinging a great sword at an enemy and they'll just power through the blow and attack you through it, staggering you of course, and it just makes the whole slow weapons category feel incredibly unreliable in the early game. But this is also why the combat feels extremely slow in general, because you can't just be aggressive. Enemies can always attack you through your stuff, so except maybe some of the trash guys in the beginning. But it's always one hit from you, wait for the mob to finish its combo, one hit from you, etc. And you pair that with the defense mechanics, because unless you could just not get hit by anything and parry everything, you're slowly getting chipped away and it just feels like you're constantly being punished. Again, it could just be a skill issue. Now the last part about the combat that I want to talk about that I didn't really enjoy in Lies of P is the posture. Like Sekiro, enemies have posture, which builds up invisibly by damaging and parrying enemies. It is very slow though, and in every single boss fight I've done, I have had only one posture break per phase, which isn't a lot, and that's with skills invested. While the posture breaks let you get in some good damage and time to heal, they also go away incredibly fast. You're required to do a full charge attack to break posture and activate the fatal blow. But because you have no idea when that posture break is going to happen, a lot of the times you get a hit in and then the boss is backing away or starting a new combo, and by the time you can get to them, you've missed your opportunity and it's already gone, and you just waste a big chunk of your damage and probably getting hit in turn. So these are some of my main complaints about the combat. And the combat is very much the soul of a Souls-like. So when it's frustrating, the game gets frustrating, which is kind of the appeal to most people. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of the genre sometimes. But Lies of P's frustration is not due to some hard challenges like other Souls games that rely on, good timing on your part with, iframing and good parries and execution on the player and just knowing the encounter. In Lies of P, it's like fighting with all the little mechanics of the game rather than the monsters. Your weapons have just very low reach, so after they're done attacking you and you try to go for them, they're just out of reach and you waste your opportunity. Or your defense options always seeming lackluster and never good enough. Or bosses that have huge variable combos that have no real tell of when they're even done attacking, and no ability to cancel out of your own actions. I get that all these complaints seem like a skill issue thing, but look, I finished the game, and hard games are hard, I get that. But the entire time I was playing Lies of P, I was thinking, do I ever get stronger? Does the game ever get faster? Do I ever get cool gear or combat mechanics or anything to make me go, oh yeah, this is awesome? And it just never really happened. And so I just kind of find that middling, and I was just like, oh, that's kind of a letdown. Also because progression in Lies of P is extremely linear. Not just because the map layouts and stuff, I'll get to that, but stat-wise, it's very boring. Every enemy scales its defense and attacks very linearly, just flat number value increases. And so you also scale all your damage and defenses very linearly, just flat generic values, which is a plus side because it just means it's really easy to tell when you're falling behind as you just start taking larger chunks of HP when you're hit, or you take too long to deal with normal enemies. But it also means that you have to keep leveling and re-leveling to grind to stay on top. So if you're spending money elsewhere like refinements and consumables, you're going to fall behind and have to grind some more. And an example of this is that all your armor pieces are directly linear to their weight and protection ratios. So every piece of armor you get is the same as the old piece, but it weighs a little bit more and has a little bit more defense, or a little bit more elemental defense, and all that. So every time you get new equipment, you also need more weight, so you have to put more stats into weight, and you always have to keep constantly upgrading your weight and your defense, because if you don't, you're just going to eat 90% of your life in one hit. And every new piece of armor just weighs more than the last and provides a little bit more defense. So it's only an upwards progression here. There's no variable of oh, maybe I want this piece because it provides a different effect. None of that stuff. And it gets old pretty quick. Now, amulets like this are also kind of boring. The boss amulets, which are cool, there's 10 of those, which allow you to do some interesting things, such as dodge with no stamina, or evade frenzy hits, or increase your scaling or something. But most of them are just stat number increases, and they're kind of boring. And even so, all the cool amulets also weigh an absurd amount, so you're forced to constantly scale your weight up if you want to keep up with your defenses and the day-to-day progression. So unless you're going to be perfect dodging everything, there's no getting out of it, because you also just can't dodge every single combo. Enemies are just faster than P is at recovering. Now, since I started this whole combat discussion, I know most of this sounds all negative, and honestly, those are just because those are my complaints about Lies of P. The combat flow is just slow and unimpactful, and it really feels like an old dated Souls game, which again is probably the point, but the game does nothing to advance the genre at all, and it doesn't really bring anything new to the table, unfortunately. The only standout mechanic is probably the weapon assembly, where you can split your handle and your blade to combine weapons together, which is cool on paper. Most of the time, it's actually just really ineffective because of poor implementation. Like, all two-handed weapons are your strength scaling weapons. All elemental weapons are your arcane scaling weapons. All your spears scale off dex. And while you can't put together like your different heads and handles, most of the time you're not going to find anything that matches like your slash and stab style, your scaling option, and your moveset that makes sense outside of what the weapons actually default with. So like, it's a cool idea on paper, and I tried my best to move around a lot of parts, and I changed my weapons all the time through this playthrough. And I changed my handle scaling and messed around with this whole system. But I ended up just with the boss weapon, which can't split parts anyways, or sometimes I just use one of the default weapons. Like, the idea is there, I don't really care about the implementation for this. Now, all that negativity being said, I still very much enjoyed my time with Lies of P, because I do love Souls-like games, and I love the challenge that they provide. And Lies of P is definitely one of the hardest Souls games I've ever played. And it's not necessarily that the game is hard, because enemy movesets aren't really complex, they're just really snappy, and that gets me all the time. And the boss encounters, though, they're all very good. I enjoyed pretty much every boss in the game except like 2. I think the only bosses I even got stuck on were like Puppet King, because its 2 phases are entirely different and have vastly different movesets, so you have to learn 2 bosses on 1 life essentially. And then I think the third to last boss, which is Lightning Melania, but I also found out that I was just underleveled through most of the game, because it became very obvious once I put in like 5 more levels here and there, suddenly the bosses hit you for significantly less due to that flat damage defense scaling. But really, boss encounters are like 80% of a Souls game. And those are the parts that stay with you and you talk about with other players and get their experience and feedback on. And since pretty much all the bosses in Lies of P were very solid, it did leave me walking away with a very good feeling and experience overall. It just took a long time to get there, mostly because the extremely slow beginning, as well as me trying to hold on to this idea that the game speed's gonna pick up and change, but it really doesn't. But again, I know I've said a lot of negative stuff about Lies of P, but this is at its bare bones just a solid, good Souls-like experience. I know everyone gets tired of the comparisons, but you kind of have to, is the thing. And I'm not saying you have to just reinvent the wheel or do something crazy, because I think Lies of P proves it that you really just need to have a solid core foundation and good experience. You don't have to go crazy, and it is kind of a shame that there isn't anything over the top or new, but what it does do with its combat system and its boss encounters is very solid to the core, just good foundations. Which, I mean, if we get DLCs and stuff, who knows what they could do. Anyway, I kept talking about combat stuff too much. But the last topic I want to quickly discuss is the world building in Lies of P. And unlike most Souls-likes, it's actually very easy to get attached to the characters and the stories that are going on with the game, which definitely makes you feel more attached to the game as a whole, because it just means it's very well implemented. Because most of the quest lines are really easy to go through with on-screen prompts and items and dialogues that just kind of show up really quick. And even when you're just glossing over most of the information, you can still pick up most of the lore, especially because it's all voice acted. And it's pretty hard to go out of your way to try and not read stuff, because I mean, even just quick words here and there are flashing when you pick up items and stuff, you get the idea. And the story itself isn't anything you haven't heard of or seen before. People build robots, robots go crazy, kill people. It's all death and apocalyptic out, and I'll save the rest of the revelations to not spoil anything, but you can piece where the rest of the story is going, I'm sure. So in that regard, I don't think there's anything too unique here, but the overall scheme of things, the characters and stuff, it's just presented very well, and it's very easy to follow, even if you're not trying. And so overall, I really did enjoy Lies of P. If you're a fan of Souls games and Souls-like, you're definitely going to enjoy this one too, because it's definitely the most polished Souls-like out there. And while it doesn't offer anything new to the genre you haven't already experienced, Lies of P does deliver a very well executed experience that most Souls fans are looking for. It's definitely worth picking up, and if you have the time and the means to do so. Just don't go into it thinking that you're getting Bloodborne 2, because it's not that. Lies of P is its own Souls game, with a very slow and methodical approach to its combat system, and that will take some fresh eyes to grasp. But that's going to be all for me. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for other Let's Talk About videos where I discuss and review games. But thank you to my Patreon members, and if anyone wants to talk shop about gaming in general, feel free to join my Discord in the description below. But yeah, peace and good luck out there, hunters.